Get out of here. Is it on?
Yeah, it's quiet.
Get out. What? Is it on? Am I on? Oh, hi. Good evening. My name is Cleve Corner. I'm the manager of author and speaker engagement at the Pratt Library, and I asked Sean to set up 10 minutes ago. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. We're going to start in about 5 minutes. Lisa and Gloria are going to speak for about 45 minutes, and then we'll have time for your questions, about 15 minutes. If you do have a question, we ask that you direct it to that microphone, or there'll be a microphone over here. We ask that because this program is live streamed on our YouTube and Facebook page, as are 90% of our other programs. So if you can't make it out to a program, you can always stream it on the Pratt's YouTube or Facebook page. We also archive the majority of them there as well. After the program, Gloria would be happy to talk further and sign your book. Ivy Bookshop is outside here, and they'd be happy to sell you one as well. So again, thanks for coming out, and we'll start in about 5 minutes.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Enoch Pratt Free Library, Libraries Writers Alive series. My name is Vivian Fisher, and I am Deputy Chief of Public Services here at the Central Branch. This evening we have as our guest author, Gloria Browne-Marshall, and moderator, Lisa Snowden McCrae. Gloria Browne-Marshall is an American civil rights attorney who has litigated cases for the Southern Poverty Law Center, Community Legal Services, Philly, and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. She is a legal correspondent, author, playwright, essayist, and racial justice activist. She is professor of constitutional law at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, and she has taught Africana Studies at Vassar. Browne-Marshall wrote and hosted Your Democracy, an animated series about the U.S. Constitution, created to help people better understand the document, and as a result of this series, she was awarded the Mid-Atlantic Emmy Award in 2023. As a legal commentator, she has spoken on various Supreme Court decisions, impeachments of Donald Trump, and constitutional questions about civilian deaths, criminal law, and racial justice. She has given legal commentary on national and international issues for France 24, CNN, NBC, CBS, BBC, NPR, WHYY, WVON, and other media outlets. And she has received numerous awards for her legal scholarship and award-winning short films. This evening's moderator, Lisa Snowden McCrae, is editor-in-chief and co-founder of Baltimore Beat, a digital and print-based news product based in Baltimore City. She is an award-winning journalist, community advocate, and diversity and inclusion champion. At Baltimore Beat, Lisa uses decades of experience as a reporter and in leadership to help reimagine a new approach to news and storytelling. Previously, she was an editor at Baltimore City Paper, the Baltimore Sun, and the Real News Network. Please join me in welcoming Gloria Browne-Marshall in conversation with Lisa Snowden McCrae up to her latest work, A Protest History of the United States.
Thank you, Baltimore.
So this is an issue that's very near and dear to my heart, the idea of protest and the idea of change. I think, although I'm on the surface kind of grumpy, I think internally I'm actually an optimist, and I think that protest is the way that we make the world better. So I appreciate you writing this. I appreciate the care that you've taken in this book of documenting as well as you could, as a nation as diverse and chaotic as this one is, our history of protest and change from literally birth into now.
Well, I thank you. And one of the things that I've always liked about Baltimore, it was back in the day when I first finished my clerkship for a federal court judge. My first job offer came from Baltimore law firm. And yes, and so I had to choose between staying in Philadelphia or coming down to Baltimore, and it was a tough decision. So I always look at Baltimore as a place that would have been home, and that would have been great. So
We are basically cousins with Philly, so it's fine.
But this book was one that I wanted to keep as a book that one could read and feel they're reading a story, but then time stop and go, wow, this really happened. And so much of this nation's history feels like that. It feels like a storybook and then other times a nightmare. And that's why I begin the book with this conflict between the United States and America. So our name, as everyone knows, is the United States of America. But the United States and America have two different personalities. And that's why we're always in conflict. So we have the United States that is this brute, capitalist, money-grubbing, founding principle of the nation. This nation started, as most of you know, in Virginia in 1607 as a business venture from England. It was a contract. Corporations began this, travel to the New World from the Old World to start a colony in search of a product they could sell. The product was tobacco. They made a great deal of money. But people were also there in the new colony because they wanted to leave the Old World to seek a better life. And so there was always this sense of the mercantile and the mercy of trying to be liberty and freedom for some and profit for another. And that United States part is the profit orientation. And the Americas, one we think of the Statue of Liberty, give us the huddled masses yearning to breathe free. And that part of America is what we look at and we think, yes, that's what I'm thinking. People should come to this country, start a new life. That's how the country began. But that whole sense of, yes, they wanted people to come to the country, but at the same time, next year is the 250th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, written by Thomas Jefferson, a brilliant man and a slaveholder. So this conflict has always been with us and continues to be with us. In this period of time, we're in the capitalist brute force part of the personality, is what's driving our politics from Washington, D.C., but we've always had the sense that we're going to stand up against the brute, and so the conflict goes back and forth and continues to do so. So that's the nature of this nation.
This is a book that could be very dry. It could be very academic, but your writing is really lyrical and beautiful.
Thank you.
And it keeps you really engaged. So I wonder if there was a section that you wanted to read for us before we start our conversation.
Well, the book begins with the Indigenous, and I think should be considered the original protesters in this nation. Then it goes from slave uprisings, because those were protests. So I expand the idea of protest beyond the people marching in the street, which is very important, and all protesters are taking that risk when they go out to voice and the complaints of the general population. Women's rights, labor movement as protests, joining that union was a protest. Through the anti-war protests and the protests against police-involved civilian assaults. In that chapter, Protesting Violent Policing, is a chapter from which I'll read right now. Very short. A little past midnight, 3 officers broke open Taylor's door with a battering ram. Walker grabbed his handgun, a weapon he was licensed to possess. The officers, at no point announcing themselves as police, proceeded to fire into the apartment with 5 bullets hitting Breonna Taylor as she slept in her bedroom. There was an exchange of gunfire. An officer was wounded. Bullets sprayed the apartment, penetrating the wall of the apartment next door. Taylor was unresponsive, pronounced dead upon arrival at the hospital. An emergency room technician, like her, probably assisted the physicians. Taylor's devastated family called for criminal charges of the officers. Protesters were beaten and arrested as officers and prosecutors delayed justice, hid information from family members, passed laws to limit freedom of assembly, intimidated witnesses, and created obstacles, while devastated parents could only tell their stories on television, hoping to receive a public response powerful enough to move prosecutors to stop shielding officers with bureaucratic obfuscation. And as we know, that was Breonna Taylor, but we could repeat in one paragraph so often the brutality that civilians have suffered. And the Washington Post, I don't know how long it's going to continue to do so under Bezos, but the Washington Post actually keeps a running track of those people killed under police influence, one way or the other. They die at the hands of police, whether or not they're shot outright or over-tasered or suffocated or died in a cell, but it continue, like Freddie Gray, to die under these circumstances. And I also have Freddie Gray in my book, as you know, and refer to his death as well. And I remember being on, I believe it was CNN, and they were discussing Freddie Gray at that time. And they said, well, we don't know how he died. And I said on air, well, it wasn't suicide.
Right.
And, you know, this whole idea that, you know, a life is taken while someone is under the control of the state government or the federal government, and we're not supposed to ask questions. We're not supposed to be concerned. We pay for the weapons. We pay for the training. We pay for all of these things that people are using as part of state government to supposedly keep us protected. And yet, when the video is available, it's not available to us. So, so many things have happened and continue to happen. Over 1,000 people a year die at the hands of police. That's what the Washington Post records show. Over 1,000 people a year. You can go to the Washington Post website and find their names, where they come from, how they died. It's documented. And unfortunately, because protests don't follow, every time someone dies in these suspicious, you know, incidents, we don't even know about it. So think about today, someone probably died at the hands of police, and we know nothing about it, and we go on about our business because the confluence of events didn't give rise to the level of protest needed to get our attention.
Yep. That incident with Freddie Gray, I always talk about the fact that that's what changed my career as a journalist. I had already been a journalist before he died. And I was a journalist out covering the uprising when folks were out in the streets when it happened. And then I also wrote about some of the cases that the officers had. Eventually, not all of them went to trial. Eventually, all the charges were dropped against the officers that were, you know, involved in Freddie Gray's apprehension. But I learned so much about how movements can get the attention of people in power, but also how power can move to quench that fire. Mm-hmm. We just had a summer where 3 Black people died. 2 of them definitely in having mental health issues. One was an older woman in her 70s, older Black woman who was killed by Baltimore City Police. There was a gentleman who went to Baltimore City Police in their car and asked for help because he was in mental distress. He ended up dead. And then another person, BJ, he was a former Arabber, one of the folks who sells fresh fruit and produce here in Baltimore. They believe he also was in distress. And my newspaper has written about it, but it's kind of been washed away. So it's like that narrative, there's always that little bit of like, folks are able to gain control of the narrative. I think that during Freddie Gray's death, which also followed the death of Mike Brown and some other young men, there was that moment where regular people controlled the narrative. After the death of George Floyd, that was another moment. But then there are also moments where power, you know, is able to wrest that narrative back.
And that's the pattern.
Yeah.
And once you know that's the pattern, then you have to prepare for the pattern.
Yeah.
2 steps forward, 1 step back. But if you don't take those 2 steps forward, then you're in a stalemate or you're going backwards. And so if you look at it in a way that there is another narrative to this country and they believe they're right. And so they are working to fulfill their narrative. At the same time, we're working to fulfill a progressive narrative. So when people say, as I've heard women say, I can't believe that we're fighting for rights that were fought for decades ago, and my granddaughter will have fewer rights than I have. And that's because the people on the other side wanted a different view of the country. So it's a constant battle. And some people believe that, you know, once the battle is won, it's won forever. It's not. And this country is in constant conflict. And I begin, as I said, with the narrative of the capitalist profit orientation versus the liberty orientation. And sometimes what they'll do is what you see people doing right now. They did it much more about 10 or 15 years ago. They'll take the liberty narrative and start using that by the profit-oriented person and call themselves liberty organizations. You start seeing liberty and patriotism and all of this other nonsense that they're calling liberty and patriotism, but it's their liberty for them to make as much money as they want in any way they want and to oppress other people. And that's why I call it nonsense, because they're abusing the word liberty. And so if we consider, if you're running a race, to understand you're competing against someone else. Sometimes we forget that we have competition here, and that competition has a counter view of the nation. So when you create your protest, is not just a protest against what they are doing, it has to also include a protest for what you want to do, and your vision of the nation. So I believe that there was progress made during that time period in which people were protesting against police violence. There was progress made when, if I can look at it this way, when George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis, initially it was just that community, right? And then it spread to the city, spread then to the state, then across the country, and then became international. As it spread, questions were, as people watched that video again and again, questions came about, what type of policing do we have? Why is he allowed to do this? What is going on with our elected officials? And the more people rose up, not just in that particular city or region or even country. I saw George Floyd protests in England and in France and in Canada. And so it pushed people in elected positions, it pushed law enforcement, it pushed prosecutors to do something because of the unrest. And that's what protest is supposed to do. Protest is supposed to cause dis-ease, cause people to stop. What are you doing? Questioning themselves, questioning policies. And so what came from that was, for example, the Emmett Till, anti-lynching federal legislation. They've been trying to, you think it was like obvious, this country, progressives in this country have been trying to pass anti-lynching legislation since the 1800s. The 1800s. And the Senate would always block it. This was the first time it was passed. My argument now is, why don't you use it? It should have been used in, a number of different, incidents that have taken place. But once it's pushed one way, then people steal that narrative, defund the police or whatever that narrative might have been, undermine that narrative, and then turn it around and use it against the people who are protesting. It's always the case. And this is what I saw over 500 years of history. You start to see the pattern. And this is my 7th book. And most of my books cover hundreds of years, because that's how I can see the pattern and practice of this country, by looking over hundreds of years. And you see it very clearly, at least I do, when you connect the dots, that the 8-hour workday, we take for granted the 8-hour workday. The 8-hour workday was signed into law by President Ulysses S. Grant. It became a reality, and that was in the 1860s. It became a reality, or the early 1870s. It became a reality 60 years later, only because of protests. But now what happens? We wake up every day, always just thinking we have an 8-hour workday, like it fell out of the sky. Santa Claus didn't give us these things. We can have all types of laws on the books, but protest makes those laws a reality. That's the difference. And so the reason why it looks like nothing's happened, they did make changes in some of the police practices. We did have more videos now available. Police are required to have cameras. Those things came out of the protests after George Floyd and Freddie Gray and many other abuses by police and murders. But then the pushback took some of those things away. So, but if we hadn't had the protests, we wouldn't have gotten those in the first place.
I appreciate you talking about the gains, because sometimes it's very easy, and I've done it myself. I think I literally did it when we were talking backstage, where like when we're in the opposite side of things, it does feel like, well, we got nothing from that. But I think that that's not a healthy way to think about this struggle or think about the growth of a country. you can't think about what happened in 2025. You got to think about it over the course
You
of
have to.
hundreds of years.
There are 3 African-American women on the stage right now. That's the progress that we take for granted. The progress we take for granted is the diversity in this room right now. We take that for granted. We wake up and take it for granted. In order for this to happen, people had to fight for it. They had to put their lives and livelihoods on the line for it. And once we get it, it's almost like, the pandemic, like it never happened. Because sometimes the way for us to fight for our rights, the journey is so difficult and so painful that once it's over, we just want to forget it.
Yeah.
We really do. We wanted to say, that's enough. We'll go forward. I have relatives that never really talked about what they've gone through, and part of what I did in my book, I thought, because the book is, one that's over 500 years, but it's about stories. And I tell the story of my great-great-grandmother, Eliza, who was born enslaved in Kentucky, and the way that she protested the treatment that she had under slave masters. And then her protest by leaving Kentucky and going to Kansas. So I'm an exoduster. And the exodusters are part of that first wave of Black migration in the 1870s that left the South for the Midwest. And, and she arrived in Kansas from Kentucky. And then she had to start a whole other life there. And I say survival is protest. The indigenous maintaining their culture after everything they've been through is a sign of protest. I'm not going to let you strip me of everything and make me into a minor version of you. And they paid a high price for that. But that's protest. So if you start expanding protest beyond what happens in the streets with signs, which is important, but if expanded to look at Rosa Parks not giving up her seat was protest. But you don't think of Rosa Parks in the street with a sign. So the idea of protest can be in such large and small ways, financing a bus for protest marchers, not buying in places that don't respect you. As Nina Simone says, I think it's Nina Simone, I'm going to say it's Nina Simone because I love Nina Simone so much. It's like, learn to leave the table when love is no longer being served. So those are ways in which we protest.
You also write about art as protest.
Yes.
I like art because I think that art is I'm a journalist, but I think that art being created, writing about art is just as important as any news story because it's another way of thinking about and distilling and processing our world. Can you talk a little bit about the way that in your brain, art and protest live together?
Well, I began as a playwright, and I still see myself as a playwright. When I get introduced, I always tell people, put playwright in there, and I'm working on a play right now. And I'm a published poet as well. And if I could sing, I'd be dangerous, but I'm not gonna break into song. That would truly be dangerous, but it would be painful to me and you if I tried. So the idea that progressives are creative. You can't tear down the master's house using the master's tools. The master created these tools, knows them inside and out, and the way progressives have moved forward is through creativity. So we have to look at what we can create. And I'll be quite honest with what's going on right now. I said during the first term of this person that he was going to bring in the National Guard into the cities because he said he was going to. And he wants to control Black people. He wants to control women. This is all about control and making a white male conservative hierarchy based on money. But the game plan they're using is a game plan that is a replica of the civil rights and labor movement game plan. Because we're the creative ones. Yeah. So they took our game plan, studied it, and came up with ways to undermine what we usually do. So let's not usually do the same thing we did before. You have to have the, 2.1, 3.1 version. We have to think creatively out of the box. How are we going to do this time under these circumstances? And most of this nation's history has been one in which the marginalized and oppressed, be they women or immigrants, people of color, have not had 3 branches of government in their favor. There's always been violence against protesters. There's always been violence against people who are pushing against the status quo. And I like people to look up, if you have a chance, the word drapetomania. 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 D-R-A-P-E, T-O, mania. I'm talking to you. You're looking up drapetomania. And when you look up this word, yes, drapetomania, I'm a teacher, so I do this. So I break the fourth wall. And because, as a playwright, my thing is that art is a way for us to learn without actually feeling like we're learning something. Storytelling is the way to learn. Storytelling is the way for us to see history. People have dried out history. They've dried the life out of history. So what do we have? Drapetomania is?
Class.
Term coined in the 19th century to describe a supposed mental illness that caused enslaved people to run away from their owners.
Yes. Is it pseudoscience? They're saying it's a pseudoscience now. But it was thought of as real science in 1851 when it was created. So there's always going to be a way to disparage people who don't want the status quo and want to think beyond it. So if we're looking at that, that means the status quo is something they're saying, you're a malcontent, you're a socialist, you're a deviant, you're this. There's going to be always something negative said, to the point of this, you have a mental illness because you don't want to be in bondage. I mean, think about that. So when you're talking about protests, understand that's how far people will go. They will take the ideas you have and use them against you. They will study the ideas that you have and find the weaknesses in them, and they'll call names. And then they will also use unfair laws and violence. So since that's the case, since that's the case, it comes down to the creativity that comes with trying to navigate all of that. And that creativity resulted in women voting, women being in positions of power, whether or not political power or corporate power, educational power, nonprofit power, journalism, all these educational institutions, all of this happened because people took that status quo and said, now I've got to think of creative ways to navigate around it. And that creativity is what progressives have had, progressives have used, and progressives need to embrace right now. Think out of the box. It's necessary. And so as a playwright and somebody who tries to think creatively, when I wrote this book, I said I want to put in storytelling. So I decided to weave in stories from my family, from the time period of great-great-grandmother Eliza and her ways of protesting, and other family members and their ways of protesting. None of these people in my family up to this point were those who were out in the streets. That's, there's that saying, a grandfather is a soldier, so his son can be a teacher, so the grandson can be a poet. So when you see the arc of time, you'll see how a person then, develops over time and uses the means and mechanisms they have of their generation to make the changes they see fit to make in order to live the life as freely as they can.
Yeah, this is I feel like 2025 is an uncomfortable year, but there's so much magic that comes out of people being uncomfortable. People don't usually create change if they're happy and satisfied. The change comes out of not being comfortable.
I think that's so true, and we're not uncomfortable enough.
Yeah, we might get there.
No, it's not a matter of might. It's going to get very ugly very soon. And that's because even the people who are protesting, and I'm not talking about you guys, I'm talking about some other people I was talking to in Brooklyn, and they're protesting a lot, but they were protesting at City Hall on Sunday. And yeah, City Hall is closed on Sunday. Yeah. And so I was like, okay, that might have made you feel good in your protest, but did that cause unease among the people you wanted to change? Did that persuade anyone? The protest is not just for the protester to get the feeling of rage out of them. The protest has to move, and this is what I've learned in my book and reading these protests. It has to evolve from the individual feeling the need to emote to strategy and tactics, and the use of the protest voice to persuade people who are not at the protest. What do you want people outside of your protest to do? Because only a small percentage will actually protest. The rest of the people need to be persuaded to do things where they are. They may be the ones to write a check. They may vote differently. They may vote somebody out of office. They might write the letter. And I'm saying right now, two major things I haven't seen really are sit-ins. No, I say three. Sit-ins, teach-ins, and letters. Real live letters to public officials, not emails. Physical letters, because people aren't sending physical letters the way they used to. They have more of an impact. So and then they have to log in every letter they receive. And when you go to the emails, the elected officials only want to see the zip codes from their dome district. And those are the people who actually get their email through. But when you send a written letter or a postcard, that bypasses all those things, and you can actually get your message to them. I would say a postcard, just in case they want to throw away the letter and not open it, the postcard has the message right on the postcard, so it's like they can see it right there. If they want to toss it, they still have to see it. So I think the other part is the teach-in that came out of the anti-Vietnam War era to actually tell people what the issues are. I was in Dallas, Texas, and I had these two older white women who came up to me. I believe they were white. They could have been passing. I don't know. But these two older white women who said, we are Trump supporters and conservative Christians. And I said, okay, and he said, but we don't understand why people are protesting. So the response that I get from most progressives is, that's ridiculous, of course you know. But what if they didn't? They drove all the way from the suburbs to come hear me in Dallas proper, in the city, because they said, we don't know, we want to understand. So we're not going to talk, we don't have to spend all our time talking about the people who drank the Kool-Aid and have an infusion of an IV every hour. We want to be more of the people who may be those you can influence with your message. What's the message? What is your messaging? Too many of the protest signs are about being witty.
Yeah.
But are they about, if legacy broadcasting or legacy media ever deign, put a protest on the air, if they were to sweep through and take images of the protest signs, what would somebody sitting at home reading those signs actually get? What message are we sending out? That's so crucial, and the teach-in is vital. I want, people can teach the message. They can have like a time period in which they come together. And social media is like, oh, I feel like I've done something. I put my name on a petition on social media. Yeah. It's going to be human interaction. Human beings are going to have to, create the movement that we need to have happen. Social media is going to benefit that. It can be used in many ways for it, but we're still going to have to go to human interaction.
Do you feel fear writing a book like this right now, speaking about the things that you speak about, doing the work that you do in this moment?
The best way I can say that is, one, I'm a believer in God, but God said have some sense. I don't know where exactly that book of the Bible is, but somewhere in there he said have some sense. Okay, but I would say yes, and my friends are concerned, and my mother used to say, there's only one of you, and there's so many of them. But I have friends, especially, what you're missing out of a lot of this, there are a lot of African-American women who are not protesting that decided they're going to sit this one out, I've been told. And unfortunately, I think that's a wrong decision. I know there are many people who were upset over what happened in the election. And they're saying, well, we did everything that was right in this country. The other people, elected this man who put us on this track. And so my thing is, if you're sitting out because you're upset about the election, the time in which Kamala Harris was running for president was 4 months. How long are you sitting out? How long are you deciding you're going to sit this one out? Because if you're going to sit out, then you have to have a time to come back. So when I've talked with them, their whole thing is, what you're doing is very dangerous. What Fannie Lou Hamer did was very dangerous. What Rosa Parks did was very dangerous. Marcus Garvey did was very dangerous. It's always going to be dangerous because this country kills people. It kills its own people. We know this. I know this. I do history. I write about this all the time. I'm not foolish. But I also know for all these people who are deciding, I'm going to sit this one out, who haven't decided exactly where when they enter, and that's up to each individual when you decide you're going to enter. But to decide it's not worth entering, that's the concern I have. And I began by reading from about Breonna Taylor. Every time I get nervous, I take precautions, but every time I get nervous, I think Breonna Taylor was at home in her bed. So for those people saying rest is resistance, she was resting. She was at home in her apartment in her bed and did not wake up. So each time I think what might happen, I think I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees, or try to pretend like you can hide from this beast. You cannot. So what I want to do is try to empower and inform as many people as possible. And I'm doing this with a book, but I'm doing this with a book and human interaction, because that's necessary for us to actually hear each other and talk to each other. I have concerns about my safety, but you should have had concerns about your safety from every day. I mean, this country, we think about these people didn't wake up one day and said they were going to be assaulted by police that day. But I don't want to also live without joy or live with hatred, because hatred to me is somebody taking my power, and I want all the power I can get. So I don't hate anybody. I don't want to be a bitter person, because bitter is unattractive, and I try to maintain my cuteness. So it's like, I can't afford to be a bitter person. I'm trying to stay attractive as long as I can. But what I want people to know is Audre Lorde has already brilliantly said, your silence will not protect you. So you might as well speak out.
To go back a little bit to what you were just talking about, with the idea of people taking a step back, the whole idea of rest is resistance. When that conversation was happening, a lot of that was happening online with the people that were like, I'm out. The thing that I wondered about, because there's not a lot of space online for nuance, and people weren't really trying to have deep conversations immediately after the election for many different reasons. How many of the people, especially if you're thinking about like Black people and Black women, that were talking about taking a step back, were still doing work that they didn't realize was work? You know what I mean? Or still doing protest. Like maybe there was someone who said, I'm out. I'm taking a step back, and then went to work in an inner city, Baltimore City school and taught kids how to read, or volunteered and taught yoga, in West Baltimore. Like that's still, I feel like that was something that wasn't really talked about when we talked about that kind of great step back. Like what are you stepping back from, but what are you by nature of just being a marginalized identity in America already still doing and don't even think of it as resistance or work?
Well, I think part of it, what we are needing is a step up. So even if they're stepping back, that means there are things they could be doing they're not going to do. And I think that is what is troubling. And when the trigger happens, and it will, because that's the pattern that I've seen, there's going to be a trigger. It's going to be something that forces people, pushes people into the forefront that they didn't want to, where they didn't want to be, but they're going to have to be because it's just gotten that ugly. So I'm concerned because protest takes preparation. It might look like the television version, people just woke up and started protesting. Martin Luther King was a brilliant tactician. And he would plan out how certain protests could work economically, with systems, because he knew he was dealing with systems. So we have people who are brilliant, who are sitting back, who know systems, and we need that information. We need their input. We have people who are brilliant when it comes to messaging, and we need that input, and we don't have it. So even though they might still be doing the things they were doing before that have been very helpful to the community, and they could be acts of resistance, we need proactive, intentional work, because that's what we're up against. We're up against intentional work. And so the Black woman, for those of you who didn't know, I really actually enjoy being a Black woman. I take great pride in my African-American heritage. And from the time period, I have this in the women's chapter, from the time period in which we had Seneca Falls back in 1848, and there were Black women meeting before Seneca Falls in Philadelphia, I found out as well. Black women weren't a part of the movements that white women wanted, and that's why you had Sojourner Truth ask that question, ain't I a woman? Is to be a part of those. There have been so many people, I think, who have discounted Black women, and that's why Black women get frustrated and say, we do so many things for so often, and we get no credit for it. And so that's why it's like, this is the last time we're gonna do anything for anybody. But we hold up so much. We have so much power. We have so much creativity, intellect. We're in so many different areas of life that without the Black woman, we're not gonna have the movement we need to have.
Do you have any advice for someone who maybe sat here and listened to this and said, okay, I want to do something soon. I want to help. I want to step up. Is there a way that you can get started? Because it can feel very overwhelming.
It can feel overwhelming, but I like to say our brains are computers. And I can't go where everybody goes. I did say the sit-in. I think it's important. I'll just give an example. You have to sit in at a grocery store. And I said this one time, and someone said a grocery store, and they said, oh yes, and then I had another person say, I did a sit-in at a grocery store. Because you have to disrupt. Protest has to be more than emoting. There's got to be a disruption of a system. So if you have a sit-in for an hour in a grocery store, I say for older people, if you are, no longer worried about your job, then you would be a great protester. That's why Martin Luther King used high school students as protesters, because that did not put in jeopardy the income of the family. For young people, if you're in college or you're in your 20s, if you're a college student, you can also be a teacher, and you can help high school students and middle school students better understand what's going on right now, because they don't. I teach constitutional law, and it's very difficult for constitutional law to be taught in a time period in constitutional crisis. So I think that it's important for people to figure out, when they go, ask themselves, how can I be of service in this moment? Ask your brain this question. If you ask yourself this question, you will begin to see the opportunities emerge. But you have to ask yourself the question. You can ask yourself the question out loud once you get home, when you're in your car, how can I be of service in this moment? And then when you begin to see the rise of opportunities, then you have to choose how to be of service. I tell people, if you're going to protest, do not protest at night. If you're going to do traditional protesting, I always try to figure out what time the sun is going to go down. And I'm out of there an hour before. Because as I told you, law enforcement, you have the good cop, the bad cop, you never know. You don't know if you're dealing with officer friendly or officer deadly. You have no idea. In darkness, bad things can happen. The other, somebody can be a lawyer. If you have a lawyer, they don't have to be a protest lawyer. I don't even know what a protest lawyer is. The ACLU has on this website a list of precautions and other things that you can do if you're protesting. If somebody knows a lawyer, the lawyer then should be the person who can come if there's arrest to get the people out of jail. There could be a person who wants to protest by adding money to the bond fund. So you don't have to go out in the street. You could just put the money in a fund. Someone has the fund. I always say, if you're the lawyer and you're the bond fund holder, do not go to the protest, because your being in the cell next to the other protest will not help the situation. The other is the lawyer's number and those things written on your arm in marker or on your clothes, because you will not have your cell phone with you. These are some of the basic things that can be done to make yourself safer as you go into these protest situations. Make sure people know where you are. Somebody else can be the driver to the protest. There are ways in which, these are just some off the top of my head, that you can participate in this. Write letters to the editor. Be a witness. We are all witnesses to this. Keep a journal of what's going on. You might be the historian for this moment. There's so much that needs to happen, because what's taking place right now in this country is going to be something that they look back on, and just like they're trying to erase history now, they'll be trying to erase this later. So we need to be able to know exactly what happened during this time and have the names, dates, and maybe be like Madame Lafarge, of Tale-Two City. Who's going to be the one keeping the information? Who's going to be the record keeper? And journalists like you are so important to this, because the legacy journalists and the legacy media have capitulated. The major law firms have capitulated. Corporations have fallen. Don't give your money to a corporation that doesn't respect your values.
Gloria, thank you so much. This has truly, truly been an honor being in conversation with you. I had to keep reminding myself that I had to talk also, because I just wanted to listen to you. So thank you. And now we're going to take it to questions from the audience.
Yeah, we have about 10 minutes for your questions. If you have a question, you can come on up to the microphone
And I especially also would like to hear questions from and concerns from people who have protested or want to protest.
So I think there's a lot of attention being paid to how we could magnify our small voices as ordinary citizens. But I also wonder what we should be able to expect from our leaders in terms of effective forms of protest. Because in the end, our voices are small, and we need to see people doing something. I don't know whether the government shutdown is one form of that and how effective you think that might be, but what do you think we ought to be looking to our leaders to do in terms of protest in this time?
I think we're the leaders we've been looking for and we've been waiting for. I also think that the people who are in leadership positions, because, as you pointed before, to the fact that there are people who have become a little complacent. And so many of these leaders are bureaucrats. They don't have fire. They don't have fight. And they've intellectualized the battle. And that's why Martin Luther King was such a brilliant strategist, because he was intellect and fire. And you have to have both. And unfortunately, I'm looking at people and I'm looking at arguments, and they think a lecture is going to do it. I also want to go back and just push back a little bit on this idea of our little voices. We have huge voices. And if you look at the anti-Vietnam War protests that took place, some of you remember that. Those protests stopped the government from being in a war. Those protests did it. The reason why people can vote at age 18 is because they protested the fact that the age to vote, young people may not know, the age to vote was 21. That was in the Constitution. There were enough protests to push people 21 years and older to change the Constitution to make the age to vote 18. So 18-year-olds didn't vote to change the Constitution. They pushed people 21-year-old and older to change. Women pushed men to pass the 19th Amendment for women to gain the right to vote. We need to understand our voices are powerful voices that can persuade people who are not in our group. But we have to figure out the messaging. How do we have the message? How do we affect change? How do we make them listen? And for those leaders who are not able to listen at this point, they haven't been made uncomfortable enough. That's why I said if we have protests in front of a closed city hall, that's not effective anymore. That was great to show the numbers and distress in the beginning, but now we have to have protests in places that people are made to feel uncomfortable. That's what protest is supposed to do, and have a message with that protest that other people can hear. So those leaders that we have, some of them either have to figure out how to play a stronger role, or we need to have a message that they need to be dismissed and other people put in their place. If they're not going to move, then they have to be moved out of the way. And there's, many of you know that phrase, lead, follow, or get out of the way. That's where we are right now. So we need to have that message on a sign, and we need to, I know some New Yorkers who are on their way down here, and they're going to be protesting around the White House. So, and I know that's a dangerous thing, because we're dealing with somebody, I believe, and psychiatrists have said has a mental illness. So that means that we don't know, outside of violence and craziness, and that what's going to come from this person who's pushed. But he's got a vindictive mindset and a vendetta against women and African Americans and immigrants. So, and he's going to use any type of contrived notion to undermine what we're doing. And that's why the collective is so important. And with the collective, we have more power, and it's not a little voice. When the collective comes together, all those little voices make for a huge voice.
But I think when you just rely on that, then it's so hit and miss. Like, we can get Jimmy Kimmel reinstated, but we can't get them to stop targeting all of the Black women in charge of federal agencies.
What did we do what's been done so far to stop them?
Court cases.
Court cases, and it's litigation, legislation, and protest. These are the three elements that make social change. One, I began my career as a civil rights litigator, and I said in those rooms, litigation is not enough. And so you have these litigators who are sitting on one side, you have the legislators who are sitting on another side, you have the protesters over here, and until we see how we're supposed to work together, yes, it's got to be a nexus together to push forward, and that's why I said we haven't gotten there yet. We haven't melded together yet. Everybody thinks they're the brilliant one. Yeah, all the lawyers are brilliant over here, and the legislators are brilliant. It's like, oh, I'm going to give you a really mean speech. That's what I'm seeing from Congress. Real mean speech. But right now, I feel like I'm on the team of people from grade school who every afternoon gets beaten up and have their lunch money taken. I don't like being on that team. So we have to think, if it's not working, what have we been doing? What are we doing to actually get what we want? Who are we waiting for to get what we want? And I think that's what's so important as well. And you don't protest on Friday in most cases and see the change on Monday. What we're talking about, the protests we're talking about, the Voting Rights Act and so many other things took time to happen. So if the goal is to push back. And this is where black women, once again, we have the Divine Nine, the sororities, we have the union workers, labor, the labor unions. And I just talked with somebody yesterday at Georgetown about where are the labor unions? The labor unions have the longest history of protest, and yet you don't hear anything from them. Nothing. I'm a member of a union, and I'm like, where are the labor unions? We're outside of people meeting in high places and nice offices. When are they going to meet with the people? So that's what I'm saying. If we're not demanding that these folks meet with the people, then the threat has to be, if you can't stand up for us, we're not going to vote for you. And make it very clear about that. So I think that we need to do more and have in the other divisions, we have people protesting Gaza here. People protesting anti-DI here. We've got the immigration issues over there. We've got all these different protests going on. We're going to have to find a commonality because it's the same core people who are doing all these things. So can we figure out how we can come up with a commonality? We don't have to, it's like, we don't have to be married in the protest groups come together. There's an old Latin saying, hook up. I don't know if you remember that, it's from the old Latin. So you don't have to be married. The groups can just hook up together around common things and have those powers come together of the numbers based on that. So that when the Freddie Gray protests happened and the other protests happened, when they saw with George Floyd, the diversity of people in those protests, that made a big impact. That diversity of people in the protests, that we're unhappy across the board. You cannot appease us in this one group because they're going to play divide and conquer. And you can't appease people and say, I'm just going to give this to this group and so you'll fall away.
We have time for two quick questions. This one here and that one over there.
There's just so much I want to say, but I totally agree with you that we, the people, are the leader at this time. There is no other leader above us. It's us. So I do feel like we, the people, can have the power. For instance, ICE is taking people off the streets of Baltimore every single day. So if we see that happen, we need to document that and then make sure we keep that as a record and give that to Costa or someone else because that's happening all the time. And to your point, like, we can boycott Sinclair, we can boycott Atlas. We have lots of things we can do here in Baltimore that will give us power. But my question really to you was, I loved hearing about the story about the two women who are Trump supporters, because I agree with you, if someone actually made the effort to come hear you speak, you might be able to win them over. So is there more to that story? Were you able to talk to them at all? Or?
Yes, I was able to talk to them. And, and they stayed for most of the talk. This is something, when I talk about this country's founding in 1607, they actually believed that the country was founded by the Pilgrims. So when we start thinking about basic history and not knowing basic history, so if people are kept unaware of the contributions of women, of the contributions of African Americans and other people of color, the contributions of immigrants, then we need to enlighten them about those things. And like I said, some people take the Kool-Aid by IV every hour, and there's only so much you can do with those people, but there are others that you may have dismissed. Right. And I also say, we have holidays coming up. Are you actually talking to your relatives? Yes. See, and people want to go out and protest in the street and convince people in the street, and they don't want to talk to racist Uncle Jim. Okay? So you need to practice on your own relatives as opposed to giving them an out and wanting to go out and talk to strangers. We need to figure out, my younger brother voted for Trump. Asking him, he couldn't explain why. I asked him why. He couldn't explain why. And I know people who do certain things, but nobody even asks them the question, why? And maybe you want to stop there. Just ask them, Have they ever been asked the question, why did you do this? You can actually hear their explanation. And then once you hear that explanation, you're better able to be able to respond to other people using that, putting that in your arsenal for future conversations or confrontations.
After my question is, you talked about building movements. You talked about how to get people out of their houses and tell people to get out and actually get, instead of staying at their at home. After the George Floyd protest, I remember that there was an autonomous zone that was actually enacted after it was a zone where they didn't have policing in. I don't remember what state it was specifically, but they actually did say we're not going to be in this area. And for a little bit of a time frame, they didn't have policing. It was good. But afterwards, there was a shooting, and then immediately there was a response to get rid of it. I think they bulldozed it or they got rid of the zone. And I felt really bad about it afterwards, but I do think that, well, my question is, how do we protect radical solutions that are implemented after they've been implemented? Like, I think that after that, we have states that just don't, they look at that and they, oh, let's see what happened. You see the shooting that happened, and we don't really realize that it's like, that's going to happen because of probably other issues we have in the United States, like gun control and stuff like that. But I think that it's hard to, how do you protect those radical solutions, or how do you encourage them, and how do you get people on the same train of those radical solutions and actually encourage them and be optimistic about those things and posts?
Thank you. And I'm glad, I want to hear, as I'm gonna say you're young because you look younger than me, but I'm glad to hear some of the questions, especially from younger people, but all people in particular. But young people are usually the engine for any movement, is gonna have to be that, and African-American women. We have to protect our solutions knowing that it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Knowing that we're going to get something, and I've seen this happen so often. People go, oh, we won, yay, and then they sit down. They're not trying to protect it. They forget that once it's been won, as Coretta Scott King says, every generation has to fight for their own freedom. And so once it's won, then you have to think, how do we protect it? I've seen it 9 out of 10 times. People think they have a win and they walk away, thinking that it's going to be there forever. So I would say, first have these solutions. We right now, I'm not hearing solutions to even some of the concerns we have right now. So we have to think of what solutions could we have for the situation we're involved in right now. When it comes to policing, what is it that we want to have happen? Folks said defund the police, but that was a great messaging for most part. But then that messaging got used against people when they were actually saying, use the funds for other resources, for health care, especially mental health care, for the right personnel to do these other things. So I think that once you have like some of these great solutions, protect them, articulate exactly what it is you wanted from them, and even if they came to with the shootings, know that somebody is going to try to undermine that progress. It might be absolutely fine, and they might have put something trigger, just like right now. They're going to try to trigger some situation with the National Guard in these different cities so that they can keep the National Guard there. They're going to like figure out how to push it, you know, to a point that there's a trigger. So there could have been some point of infiltration, and it could have been there was a shooting because you didn't have the counseling there to help with the conflicts that were within the community. So those things could have been reasons why that happens eventually. I'll tell you this one last thing that people don't think about when it comes to conflicts in our communities is that during the time period, and some of you might remember this, think about Al Capone. Okay, I know this sounds, I know it's like very corny, but you had Italian on Italian crime. Where I am working in New York was called Hell's Kitchen, still calls Hell's Kitchen. You don't call something Hell's Kitchen because it's a pretty place, okay? Hell's Kitchen was a place where Italians and Jewish gangs used to fight it out all the time. I actually had someone who was Irish who was part of a gang in Hell's Kitchen. They put money into those communities. That's when you start looking at the boys' clubs. That's where they came from. They put the money into those communities in order to stop that crime, stop the conflict among the young people there. They had Job Corps. They had these different resources. So when they're not putting the resources into these black communities where you have crime, it's because they know they want a certain number of people to die. They know how to stop it because it's been stopped before for other ethnicities, and they've chosen not to put that investment into those communities. And so another part of protest would be for people to put those investments into the communities, knowing the government is not going to do it. The government is not going to want to save people that, and this is something that many of you know, by the year 2045, this country is going to be majority people of color. That's why this is all happening. In case, and this is in my book as well, in case you didn't know this, by the year 2045, this nation is going to be majority people of color. And that's why they are trying to make more white babies. They want more white babies. They want to deport as many people of color who are Latino as possible. They are undermining the economic pillars for the African American community. And they are taking away the options for women so that they then are reduced back to being under control of men. That's what's taking place in this nation. So when you're talking about our solutions, if we keep that in mind so that we're not just going after the tentacles of the monster, of the beast, go for the gut of the beast. So some of the brilliant ideas you're going to come up with and your friends have to take into account not all the ways in which we are being attacked, because they are all coming from a body that wants to have apartheid in this nation, that no matter what the demographic is, it still stays controlled by angry, older, white men with money. Period. Yes. So those solutions, so the solutions need to, you're talking about so many things happening at once. Yes. But if you go for the gut of it, what is it that they're really after? They're really after controlling the country and keeping it a patriarchal system, or making it go back to a patriarchal system. So those solutions, and then know if you come up with the brilliant solutions, how do you then protect that solution?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please help me thank tonight's moderator, Lisa Snowden McCrae. And this evening's author, Gloria Browne-Marshall.
Thank you. Power to the people. Power to the people. Power to the people.